Here's what they never taught you in school. Two of the greatest geniuses in human history, Nikola Tesla and Albert Einstein, independently arrived at the same conclusion. A conclusion that contradicts everything we were raised to believe. A conclusion that scientists to this day are afraid to voice without risking their careers. They both believed that death is an illusion, that the soul is not a religious metaphor or a comforting fairy tale. It's energy, real, measurable, eternal. And today I'm going to tell you everything. What they knew, what was hidden, and what actually happens to you after your heart stops beating. Get ready, because after this video, you will never look at death the same way again. Let's start with Tesla, because he went further than anyone. Nikola Tesla was obsessed with one idea his entire life. Not electricity, not alternating current, not Wardenclyffe Tower. He was obsessed with the nature of energy itself. What it is, where it goes, where it comes from. In his personal diaries, classified for decades and kept in US government archives, Tesla wrote something extraordinary. He wrote that human consciousness is not a product of the brain. The brain is merely a receiver, an antenna, a device that picks up a signal from a field that exists beyond the physical body. Stop for a second and think about what that means. If your consciousness is a signal and the brain is only the receiver, then when the receiver breaks down, the signal doesn't disappear. It simply stops being received. A radio wave doesn't die when you turn off the radio. It keeps existing in space. Tesla was convinced that is exactly how the soul works. But he went even further. In the 1930s, near the end of his life, Tesla conducted experiments that were never officially published. He was attempting to build a device capable of receiving signals from the dead. He called it a telephone for communicating with the other world. Sounds like the ramblings of a madman. Wait. Thomas Edison, his longtime rival, was simultaneously working on the exact same project. Two of the greatest inventors of their era both believed that between the world of the living and the world of the dead, there exists a frequency, specific, detectable, and that one day humanity would learn to tune into it. Now Einstein. And this is where it gets even more fascinating, because Einstein spoke about this in the language of physics, hard, mathematical, irrefutable. One of the fundamental laws of thermodynamics, the first law, states, energy cannot be created or destroyed. It only transforms from one form into another, always, without exception. This is not a theory. This is a law of nature, as unshakable as gravity. Einstein once said the following. He said that if you accept that human consciousness is a form of energy, then its destruction after death would violate one of the most basic laws of physics. Let that sink in. The theoretical physicist who created the theory of relativity is telling you, if the soul is energy, it cannot die. It is physically impossible. It would be illegal by the rules of nature itself. But where does it go? This is where things get simultaneously terrifying and breathtaking. Modern quantum physics offers an answer that makes your hair stand on end. In the 1980s, physicist David Bohm, a student of Einstein, developed a concept he called the holographic universe. His idea was this: our entire visible world is essentially a projection, like a hologram. A three-dimensional image that exists because somewhere at a deeper level of reality, its complete informational matrix is stored. And consciousness is part of that matrix. Not part of the body, part of the very structure of reality itself. This means that when your body dies, your consciousness doesn't dissolve. It returns to where it came from, into the informational field of the universe, into what Tesla called the ether, into what religions for thousands of years have called the spiritual world. Only now it has a mathematical description. All right, that's theory, that's physics, that's philosophy. But what actually happens in the moment of death? What does a person feel? What do they see? What does their consciousness experience? This is where I want to tell you about things that science refused to study for a long time, and then eventually started to, and wished it hadn't. Around 40 million people worldwide have experienced clinical death and come back. 40 million. That's not a handful of cases. That's the population of an entire country. And their descriptions of what happened are strikingly consistent regardless of culture, religion, age, or country of origin. A Buddhist from Japan, a Christian from the United States, an atheist from Russia, and a child who knows no religion at all describe the same thing. Here is what happens. First, the sensation of exit. Consciousness separates from the body. The person sees themselves from above. They see the resuscitation room, the doctors, their own motionless body below. And yet they feel completely calm. No pain, no fear. Only a strange, impossible clarity. Then, movement. A pull towards something. Most describe it as a tunnel, not necessarily dark, more like a spatial passage, a sense of speed, a sense of moving through something rather than simply floating in empty space. Then, the light. And this is where things get to the part that makes people cry decades later when they try to describe it. The light they see is not simply brightness, it is a presence, living, warm, completely loving. People say this light is the one thing they can never describe accurately enough with words, because human language simply doesn't have the right vocabulary. Neurosurgeon Eben Alexander, who himself experienced clinical death and spent 7 days in a coma with completely destroyed cortical brain function, wrote a book about it. His conclusion is this: what he experienced there was more real than anything he has ever experienced here. After the light, encounters, family members, friends, people who died long ago, people you haven't seen in years, and they don't just appear, they communicate, but not with words. It's a direct transmission of thought, a direct transmission of feeling, instant understanding without any need to speak aloud, as if all the barriers that exist between people in the physical world simply don't exist there. Then, the life review. And this is perhaps the most unsettling part of all, because it's not simply a replay of memories, it's the experience of every single action you ever took, simultaneously from the perspective of everyone that action affected. You feel the pain you caused another person exactly as they felt it. You feel the joy you gave exactly as they experienced it. Nothing is hidden. Nothing is forgotten. Absolute, crystal clear honesty with yourself. Not a trial, not punishment, simply a complete understanding of what you did with the time you were given. And here's the question that everyone who has been through this asks. If it's so good over there, why did they come back? The answer is always the same: they didn't want to. They were sent back. Someone told them, or communicated without words, that their time had not yet come, that they needed to return, that they had unfinished business. Now I want to tell you about one study that turned the scientific world upside down. In 1998, Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel launched a large-scale clinical study. He took 344 patients who had survived cardiac arrest. All of them were resuscitated. All of them were clinically dead. The brain received no oxygen, no electrical activity was recorded whatsoever, meaning that by every medical parameter, during that period they could not think, feel, or see anything. In principle, physically impossible. 18% of them described detailed experiences during clinical death. Many described events that were happening in other rooms of the hospital during their resuscitation, events that were later confirmed by medical staff. One patient accurately described where a nurse had placed his dentures while performing resuscitation, with precision, in detail, while his brain was dead. Van Lommel published the results in The Lancet, one of the most respected medical journals in the world, and wrote in his conclusion something that the scientific community has never fully recovered from. He wrote, "Our data suggests that consciousness is not a product of brain activity and may exist independently of brain function." Read that again. One of the world's leading cardiologists, in one of the most respected scientific journals on the planet, wrote, "Consciousness exists independently of the brain. This is not a YouTube video. This is not conspiracy theory. This is peer-reviewed science. So why isn't this taught in schools? Why isn't it discussed on the news? Why does official science continue to pretend none of this exists? The answer is uncomfortable, because accepting this as fact brings an entire system crashing down. It dismantles the materialist worldview on which hundreds of years of Western science are built. It destroys the idea that a human being is simply a biological machine that's born, runs for a while, and breaks down. It upends the foundation for many conclusions about what matters in life and what doesn't. It's too large a restructuring, too costly, for science, for economics, for power. It's easier to pretend it isn't there. But let's go back to Tesla, because he knew something else, something that even circles dealing with these topics rarely discuss openly. Tesla was convinced that the universe is a living system, not a collection of random physical processes, but a structure that possesses something like consciousness. He called it the universal mind, and he believed that it is to this mind that the human soul returns after death. It doesn't dissolve, it doesn't disappear, it integrates. Like a drop of water returning to the ocean, it ceases to be a separate drop, but the water goes nowhere. In his famous 1915 interview, Tesla said the following. He said that death is simply a transition from one state of vibration to another, that everything in the universe vibrates, everything has a frequency, and that different levels of existence are simply different frequencies. We can't see ultraviolet light. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We can't hear ultrasound. That doesn't mean there's silence. We can't measure the consciousness of the deceased. That doesn't mean it's gone. Quantum physics today approaches this from a different angle and arrives at the same conclusion. The quantum consciousness theory of Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff states, consciousness is a quantum process. It occurs at the subatomic level inside neurons, and when the body dies, the quantum information that constituted the consciousness is not destroyed. It disperses into the quantum field of the universe. It becomes part of something larger. It remains. Stuart Hameroff said it plainly. He said, quantum information cannot be destroyed. If a person dies, their quantum consciousness enters the universe. In a sense, you could call that a soul, a scientist, a professor of anesthesiology at the University of Arizona, calling it a soul, not metaphorically, literally. Now, I want to talk about what happens next, after your consciousness has left the body, after the tunnel, the light, the reunions with loved ones. What then? Where do you go? What happens to you one day, 1 year, 100 years after death? There is no single definitive answer, but there are several consistent pictures that emerge from multiple sources, from accounts of those who survived clinical death, from studies using regressive hypnosis, from religious traditions that across all their diversity surprisingly often describe the same thing. The first picture. Existence without a body is existence in a space of pure meaning. There is no time as we know it, no linear movement from past to future. There is only an eternal present. People who experience deep episodes of clinical death describe a feeling that they have always existed and will always exist, and this does not terrify them. It fills them with absolute peace. The second picture. There is learning there. This sounds strange, but an enormous number of people working with regressive hypnosis, in particular psychotherapist Michael Newton, who worked with thousands of patients, describe the same pattern. After death, the soul goes through a period of integration, making sense of the life just lived, then a period of rest, and then a period of preparation for the next incarnation. Yes, the majority of sources point to the fact that this is not the end of the journey. It is a pause between chapters. The third picture. There is structure there. There are different levels, different spaces, not heaven and hell in the religious sense, no lakes of fire and golden gates. But there are states of higher vibration and lower vibration. And where exactly the consciousness ends up depends on what it was like in life, not on how many times you prayed or whether you fasted on Fridays, but on how much love was in you, real love, not declared love. And here Tesla appears again. Shortly before his death, he wrote in his diary, "I have spent my entire life studying energy, and I have come to the conclusion that the most powerful energy in the universe is not electricity and not nuclear reaction, it is love, because it is the only energy capable of not just being transmitted, but multiplying in transmission. It is the only form of energy that breaks the rules. and that is exactly why it is so feared. He wrote this in his personal diary, not for publication, for himself. The man who gave the world alternating current, radio, wireless energy transmission in the final years of his life wrote that the greatest force in the universe is love. Coincidence? Or did he know something we have yet to understand? Here is what I want you to take away from this video. Not belief, not religion, not fear. I want you to carry one simple question to ask yourself today while there is still time. If your soul is truly eternal, if it will exist long after this body stops working, then what are you doing with that eternity right now? How are you filling it? What will you leave in that informational field that Tesla called the ether and quantum physicists call the field of consciousness? What will the universe know about you? Because from everything we've seen, it remembers everything, it feels everything, and it has a very, very long memory. This wasn't just a video about mysticism or conspiracy theories. This was a conversation about physics, about mathematics, about what two of the most brilliant minds in human history believed, about what a growing body of scientific evidence is telling us, about what 40 million people who were there and came back are telling us. Death is not the end. It's a door. Tesla knew it. Einstein understood it. Quantum physics confirms it. And 40 million people can testify to it. The question is not whether there is something after death. The question is, are you ready for what's waiting there? If this video hit you somewhere deep, leave a like, not for me, but so that as many people as possible can see this. People who right now may be afraid of death, who need to hear this. Subscribe if you want to keep having this conversation, because we've only just begun. In the next video, I'll tell you about people who have died multiple times, and what they saw each time was different. It will change everything you think you know about this topic. See you on the other side of the screen.